Substack.com and locally over at BadDogSports.com. Come on in. The chat room is open on YouTube. And as always, if you want your daily American soccer content, please subscribe here on YouTube and join us tonight. If you have any questions for the panel, please don't hesitate to ask us tonight. And real quick, tonight's segment is sponsored by Dino Luzzi Energy Drink. When I need that extra kick to power through match analysis and late night transfer rumors, there's only one drink that delivers authentic Italian energy, and that's Dino Luzzi. Crafted in Italy with the same passion I bring to this show, because real energy drink comes from real insiders, just like real soccer talk comes from us. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight as we are ready to go for this great discussion, because we're going to talk about the current situation with the collective bargaining agreement with the USL Championship League and the USL Players Association. Joining me tonight from Beyond the 90, my colleague Carter Krishnaier from the Hammer and Down podcast on Birmingham Legion, Taylor Hodges. We have the producer of the Orange County SC Soccer Cast, Mr. Andy King. And joining us again, now he's backed up, the one and only John Krasinski from Pittsburgh Soccer Now. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me tonight. We're going to have some great conversation here. If I could just say this, Kartik, you've written about it. I've written some things about the situation with the CBA. And to me, honestly, if we can just go ahead and say this whole situation right now, and obviously there seems to be some positives here and there, but the real concern is we may not have the season start on time. And right now we're just already maybe a month and 2 to 3 days away for this brand new season to start. And of course, we know the Riverhounds have wanted to defend their title. The other clubs are trying to knock them off to make sure they don't defend their title. So from what you have read and what you've written and heard, what's going on right now inside the negotiating room between the Players Association for USL Championship players and USL as a whole at this point in time?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for having me and having this important discussion with all of us here. Unfortunately, what has happened in the last few weeks is we've had stagnant progress in the negotiating room, if not some backsliding. So let me try and make this as succinct as possible and do this as quickly as possible. There are several issues separating the management of USL. And I want to stress that's the management of USL, which is structured differently than every other football league in the world and every other professional franchise-based sports league in the United States. The owners of the individual clubs do not own USL. So when we're talking about negotiations, we're talking about negotiations with Paul McDonough, Justin Papadakis, Garrett, who's the legal counsel at USL HQ. We are not talking about the owners like we would talk about in other labor disputes. So let's establish that first. So the issue separating HQ and the players right now are licensing fees, where they're very, very far apart. They are the issue of healthcare. Now, there are many clubs in the USL that offer good healthcare plans to their players and to their staffs, to their front office staff. There are other clubs that do not offer healthcare. It's very a la carte. It's done on a club-by-club basis. There is a difference of opinion on the floor in terms of the minimum compensation. And remember, when we talk about compensation in USL, we are not talking about straight salary. We're talking about compensation, which could be just straight salary if clubs don't offer anything else, or could include healthcare, could include housing. And then there's a fourth issue that's, I think now the poison pill that's been inserted, which is in the previous CBA, there were a total of 3 mutual terminations clubs could exercise, could trigger with a player they wanted to terminate on a guaranteed contract, 3 per 2 seasons. So you could use 1 in 1 season, and then you would have 2 for the next season, is how it would work. Or if you used all 3 in 1 season, then you wouldn't have any for the next. Now, USL HQ wants to throw in, apparently, from what I'm told from by the union, and keep that in mind. I heard this from this part from the union, so they might be pushing a particular narrative. It's because a handful of USL championship owners with what we would call the less ambitious teams want a provision where they can just arbitrarily terminate guaranteed contracts during the course of a season and maybe give 20 cents on the dollar, right? Give 3 weeks wages or 4 weeks wages and say goodbye, even though you're on a guaranteed contract. That is effectively a poison pill that got thrown into the negotiating room in January. We had those other three issues I mentioned that separated the players and the league. And when the CBA expired December 31st, now we have a fourth.
Kayla, let's go to you now. When you hear that news about what's been going on in the negotiating room between USL and the Players Association for the Championship League, in your mind, what's the chatter around Birmingham right now? Is there nerves going around saying we're scared that we may not have a season to start off? I mean, we all know what goes on in downtown Birmingham at the Progressive Stadium. What the situation is at this point in time that you feel that what Kartik said and what you've heard and what needs to happen to make sure that this season does start off properly?
Well, the conversations that they're having at local clubs versus the conversation they're having nationally feels very different right now. Doing the USL show and kind of getting that national lens versus my local lens that I have in Birmingham, it's a very different conversation. On the Birmingham side, they have been very forthright and very early on to give a lot of player protections and a lot of things that were very, I don't want to call them very pro player. That'd be a little too kind to my club. But they were like, in terms of getting the CBA signed and coming to the table and saying, we're going to get this done. From neutral reports, this is not even from Birmingham. This is from national sources that I really trust. Birmingham was one of the first few to go to the table and say, we'll sign it. And they've been known to give some of the higher contracts. So on the Birmingham front, they're not too worried. On the national front, the conversations that I've been having with owners around the league and specifically the USLPA, just kind of loose conversations I've been having with those groups. The biggest thing about not having a quote unquote lockout, right, is long because right now they are all just operating under the old CBA, will continue operating under the old CBA as long as they continue to negotiate in quote unquote good faith. As long as negotiations stay in quote unquote good faith, then they will continue going on as normal. If things are still moving in positive directions and nobody's stalling things or nobody's adding poison pills, for example, then they could take this thing all the way to the USL Championship Final 2026. And it's no big deal. They'll continue operating in that way as long as things are in quote unquote good faith. The moment things like poison pills are thrown into the mix, the moment that somebody stops coming to the table, or from what we have heard, certain clubs not even coming to the table at all, period, that's when good faith stops being enacted. So in Birmingham, they're not very worried because they know they've been, as I don't want to overuse this term, but quote unquote right side of history. Right. They feel like they are doing things right by the players. And from what I hear from the PA, loosely, it's about the same. I think on a national lens, that is the word. That's the thing that I'm looking out for, is that good faith argument.
Mm-hmm. No. And so far, that's the hope we all have. Continued good faith negotiations, and hopefully they can hammer out a deal as quickly as possible. But if it continues on into the new season, hopefully that won't put any issues going into this brand new season once March 6th comes around. Andy, we'll go to you first. Obviously, Orange County, not always known for those little issues here and there. Of course, we all know the situation with the championship soccer stadium back in the day, but this seems to be a little bit more bigger. I mean, what have you heard over in Orange County, in Irvine, and what has Dan Rootstein told you or told the supporters, especially your fellow podcasters on the Soccer Cast, about this entire situation?
Come on,
And
producer
Andy
Andy.
is
Come on, man.
come on, Andy.
Producer Andy.
There he
There we
goes.
go.
We got you.
There it is.
I'm old, so I wear progressives, and it's really hard to see the tiny little icons on the screen.
Yes.
Hey, thanks for having me on. And I'll say, from the team side, we have not heard a lot, and I think they are, the vibe I get is they're just respecting the process, and they don't want to let out any information prematurely. Most of what we've heard is kind of, I won't even say back channels. It's a lot of educated guesses and things like that. From the Orange County side, we haven't heard one way or the other how things are going. I'll just add that, most of what we've been hearing is from the Players Association, and I would say that they are probably winning the public relations war on this topic. But again, I haven't heard anything specific. Just from past experience, we know that, in a place with a high cost of living like Orange County is, these negotiations can be kind of complicated because, especially when you start including housing in someone's compensation, what's that look like from here compared to, and this isn't a dig at anybody, but living in Orange County compared to living in Colorado Springs, compared to living in Phoenix, compared to living in Birmingham. Again, not a dig at anybody, just reality of economics.
Well,
No,
Andy, I'm sorry to jump in really fast on this. Talking about cost of living, we talked about this with Oliver Gage, where one thing that Jay Heaps has talked about in Birmingham has one of, if not the lowest cost of living in the USL Championship, maybe even the USL League One as well. Meanwhile, Loudoun had to not only deal with being an MLS2 team for a long time, but also having to deal with the highest cost of living in the United States, being in the DC area. So, like, that is a great point on terms of like that bottom floor, that quote unquote $50,000 as being thrown out there for Division One, $50,000 in Birmingham and $50,000 in the DC area are completely different things, and those are the same static floor that everybody's having to contend with.
No, that's very true. That's very true. I mean, look, even Delaware had, I mean, there's no USL team in Delaware at this point in time, but if there was, I mean, there's also low taxes there as well. I think there's no sales tax in Delaware. They got the income tax. There's no income tax in Delaware. So, there's certain states that, you got to abide by certain rules in certain situations when you're living there. And speaking about living in certain situations over in Pittsburgh, and John, I mean, first time ever Pittsburgh Riverhounds wins the title in the second division of American soccer, and at the moment their title defense, well, technically is in jeopardy. And what's going on in Pittsburgh, and how are the Riverhounds fans feeling about this right now? That look, negotiations, as we already said, still going on, still in good faith, but are there nerves going on in Pittsburgh at this point in time?
I'll be honest, it's been very quiet, and I will say this: the fan base, if you want to look at the hardcore fan base, the Pittsburgh fans, the Steel Army, have been very pro player through the past 6 to 8 months, especially. I mean, you could even look at some of the issues that were bubbling under the surface in terms of maybe what was going on with Bob Lilly as the head coach, and how things transpired, and the Steel Army and the were very pro player. I will just say that through that entire process. And the other thing that's fascinating, it's just absolutely fascinating, is that when I interviewed the executive director of the the Players Association, Connor Tobin, he talked a lot about Pittsburgh and how impressed he was with how the players dealt with what was going on within the organization, how the organization was handling different things. And he just said that, the fact that they accomplished what they accomplished in winning the title, and going on a run like that with an acting coach, and also, in dealing with the organization, he wasn't going to get into too many specifics, but he just, it was very enlightening, eye-opening. Well, I mean, we kind of knew some things that were bubbling behind the surface, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the players accomplishing what they did, not only that, they get to the final for the first time in club history along with Tulsa. And I think, the Riverhounds leadership, they have some core returning leaders coming back to the club. Danny Griffin, Robbie Mertz. Robbie Mertz was on the executive board for the Players Association for quite a number of years. I'm sure that they were unified all the way through the postseason run and their late season run to accomplish what they did. But that there were I can tell you there were conversations in the background heading into that moment, the championship game, along with the players from Tulsa and probably throughout the league, where they really wanted to send a message. But I think in sending that message, I think the league, did not. We all know this. The league did not like that. There was no ceremony as far as the after the game. There was just a trophy getting handed off, and some league executives just running away or something. So it was crazy. It was surreal. It was that's kind of what happened. Of course, the players wore the T-shirts. The T-shirts and members of the Steel Army. If you look at photos from the match that night and the video that day, try pro standards first. Signs were up, and the players were wearing the T-shirts. The USL HQ Pro Rel and the Tri Pro Standards First, right across the front of the chest as they were coming out on national television, CBS Sports. So it was they made their statement, and I think that's the one thing that we, at least here in Pittsburgh, at least those of us in the media, those of us who are following the team closely, and the diehard fan base have, I think they're all standing behind the players. Now, all that being said, the winter, the off season, the winter, it hasn't been business as usual, because the Riverhounds, of course, announced that that Rob Vincent, who was the acting head coach, would take over as the head coach. So that was a little, but other than that, once he stepped foot into the permanent head coaching role, and sporting director Dan Visser and Vincent, and they hired new coaching staff, and they went about business as usual. And that's the big thing we're seeing. We're seeing it's business as usual from the club level, and that's something also that Tobin emphasized, is that from a club level versus dealing with the USL Championship. And he talked a lot about that in his interview with me. But again, I think from the perspective here is excitement to get this new season off the ground. There really hasn't been much in the way of any conversation. I had a schedule. I got interrupted by the snowstorm last week. I had an interview scheduled with Mertz that I put back to this week. So I'm really looking forward to having that conversation with Robbie, both on and off the record, see what's really going on. But at least from the players' union standpoint, and how they feel. The organization itself is, again, I think they're trying to operate business as usual. And I think someone else here in this panel mentioned, who's winning the PR war. There is no winners and losers. It's just one-sided. I mean, we have not heard a single thing from USL headquarters. And maybe that's their posture. That's what they're how they're positioning themselves. And it may be, in some respect, they might be winning the PR war by just keeping your mouth shut, and eventually a collective bargaining agreement may come together. there's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of people talking behind the scenes here in Pittsburgh about that, and there's different perspectives. Some people think, the players union is asking for too much. I certainly can see that. Again, the die-hard core fans and the players here are unified.
Well, I will say this. First of all, I'm glad to see Andy back. He had his little camera issues, but I'm glad he's back on with us. I mean, look, gentlemen, I mean, obviously, look, like I said, we all want them to start on time. We all want them to get this season off running, and just no interference of any kind whatsoever. But once again, between the point of the introduction of promotion relegation up to this point now, that the original CBA, even though they are playing on it, did expire at the end of the 2025 calendar year. And now we just lost John. Hopefully he'll come back on with us. The hope is that that they do start on time, because Kartik, as you said in your writings, this was the biggest bombshell that USL threw out there. This was the biggest bombshell that USL decided to do, not just promotion relegation, create the new First Division League. And to me, it's like, why did they worry about that sort of stuff when they still had negotiations to do with this collective bargaining agreement that they had to get done right away? I don't understand why Paul McDonough had to rush into this, bringing out Pro Rel and the new First Division League, when this CBA situation should have been hammered out right away. No offense there, Kate.
Yeah. So, Daniel, I can't stress enough the point you just made. And there were club executives that, when the First Division was announced, complained to me. Now, the Pro Rel thing they knew about. They took a vote. The Board of Governors took a vote, and then the press release came out a day later. But the First Division thing was a shock to many of the club executives as well. They were informed the night before. A few clubs chose not to send out the press release as a result, even though they were all told by USL HQ, send the press release out to your local media. So how it affected the negotiations, I've heard this from multiple player representatives in addition to hearing it from Connor himself. So it's not just Connor's spin, it's what player reps at multiple clubs have told me, that there are these issues we talked about earlier that separate HQ, USL HQ, and the players, but they were going along on a logical timeline to get the CBA done by December 31st, or worst case scenario in January. Then these two things get thrown into the room about First Division and then Pro Rel. And if you are the players union, and actually the USL PA is actually not yet certified to represent that D1 league, well, because it doesn't exist, but they're not the certified union yet, at least for that. This throws a real monkey wrench into negotiations, especially when you're going to do a longer-term CBA. Some of the clubs, and we can presume a club like Sacramento, a club like Indy 11, a club like Lou City will be in the new Division 1 or USL Premier, as we now know it will be called. So because you're representing those players, it creates a little bit of a problem to go back to the table after that's been thrown out there and negotiate an agreement without knowing what D1 and Pro Rel will look like. Now, in fairness to USL HQ, my understanding is they have given the players a little more detail about what the D1 will look like and what the promotion and relegation potentially could look like than the public knows, or that, quite frankly, a lot of executives at individual clubs know, which maybe that's not a good thing. But still, that created an issue, and Paul McDonough, every time he gives an interview to The Athletic about promotion and relegation and Division 1, it creates more kind of backlash among players, saying, okay, these guys are talking like they have this incredible structure, this incredible business, yet they're not paying us a living wage in some places. In places like Orange County, in places like Monterey Bay, places like Oakland, it's much more expensive to live. So they're not paying us a living wage. Some clubs are not covering our health care. And there are good clubs and bad clubs. I'll say, Kaylor, you're absolutely right. Birmingham has been a leader in this, partly because Jay Heaps himself is a former player and was a player rep for his club for New England with the MLSPA back when he was a player. So he understands a lot of these issues and the player perspective better than some executives at other USL Championship clubs. Quite frankly, it's not just a byproduct of cost of living in Birmingham. It's because they also had, I think, the right guy running the organization there to understand the player's perspective. But the bottom line on this, Daniel, is you're right. The D1 and Pro-Rel conversations have caused problems, and it can be moved beyond, except Paul McDonough can't help himself, and he's constantly giving public interviews with the sort of rhetoric that would make you think USL is a legitimate challenger to Major League Soccer. Now, all of us know that that's not actually the case. But if you're representing that publicly in order to try and get investors to buy in to the Division I league, then you can't complain when the players say, pay us a living wage, cover our health care, and let's have better playing conditions and working conditions for ourselves.
Exactly. Kayla, I know you have to get out very soon, but if you have any final thoughts, please go ahead.
You have a couple things. First, I want to talk on something that John said earlier. I was at the USL Championship final, and there was just the USL CBA posturing that was happening there, like going up to around the stadium and being around some higher end folks, being around some of the higher ups, right? Going into the presser areas, there was tension. Like, it was really tense around One Oak Field, and hearing a lot of the conversations, the whispers that were happening around there. It was intense. But there was a couple of things that John said, talking about like them being so proud of Pittsburgh and like, wow, what they had done. There were several comments made to both myself and John Morrissey, USL Tactics, on social media of, there is no question that Pittsburgh got hot when they did. Like, there is, like, Bob Lilly was put on administrative leave, Rob Vinton took over, and suddenly they're playing the most free football they have ever played in their lives. Like, there is no question about it. And without saying what they were saying it, if you're picking up what I'm throwing down here. The other part of it was, the USLPA definitely has been winning the public relation battle, in the sense of like talking about the ceremony afterward. I was on the pitch when Pittsburgh won the final. Like, I was standing right in front of the Steel Army when the final penalty was scored. And one thing that happened was, the way that it was told to me about the ceremony situation was, the CBS was going to college football, and they needed a trophy lift on TV. They didn't have enough time to set up the full thing to have the trophy lift on TV. And from my perspective, where I was, that seems like it's pretty accurate, in the sense that they were looking for Danny Griffin. Like, they were yelling into the Steel Army horde that I was in the middle of, like, we need Danny right now for the trophy lift. They're like, we'll get Danny away from the fans. We need him for a trophy lift. And they got it on TV, and then they went on. Now, this goes to what the USL has been struggling with, and it's what, like, we've been talking about all day here, is having a little bit of foresight, right? What they could have done was have the trophy lift on TV, then put up the stuff and done the proper trophy lift for the players, for the fans. They didn't think that far ahead. They said, we did our trophy lift on CBS, now we're getting out of here. Yes, it's awkward because you had two trophy lifts, but again, it's just one of those things of like, if you just thought this one through just a little bit, we wouldn't have these conversations of, why was there no proper trophy lift? Maybe the answer was CBS going to college football. That's probably accurate, but they could have avoided the second part by doing a proper one. In terms of Pro-Rel, this is something that I think is very important to talk about when talking about the CBA. in order for in order for pro rel to happen, the CBA, a new CBA, not this CBA, another CBA after this, has to be signed and rectified, because it is, according to labor laws, this is a change in the workplace environment. Going up and down a division is a change in the workplace environment. There is also a little bit of backstory with this. Check out the USLPA versus Charlotte Independence in relation to Enzo Martinez. Charlotte Independence self-relegate. They go down. They weren't going to pay Enzo Martinez what he was worth. Conversation was they were going to try to pay him a League One salary. He signed a USL championship contract. They weren't going to pay him that. USLPA goes to court on his behalf. He gets his money. If a team relegates, the USLPA is going to have to do this constantly unless a new CBA is signed. Not this CBA, the CBA after this. And it's going to have to go from Premier to Championship to League One. It's going to be one unified CBA. There's another side to this as well, which is the USL Super League side, the women's side. Now, the women's side is already kind of running under their own self-imposed rules, not a proper CBA, but they are doing things right from what I'm hearing from the players over there. But one thing that when we talked to Betsy Howe several years ago, she had talked about how at the time the Super League was supposed to be a second division league, not the first division league. And they were going to run the same exact CBA as the men's. They were going to run equal pay, equal rights, everything equal across the leagues. Wonderful. That's great. So are they going to do the same thing with USL Premier? Because if they bring in a USL Premier CBA, from the USL's own words, they're also going to be bringing that same CBA to the USL Super League. But if somehow that's a downgrade for the Super League, then is the Premier going to be even better? Hopefully so. But this has created so many more problems for themselves because, as we say on the USL show, the USL loves to announce crap. It's their favorite thing to do. They love to announce things. They don't know what they're announcing. But do you guys remember when USL was going to Atlanta again? Of course you don't, because they just love to announce things. They love it. It's their favorite thing. So this is just another situation where they're announcing stuff. Now, like I've said, everything I've heard is that conversations are still in good faith. I'm not worried about a lockout yet, but if things keep trending the way that they are, where certain clubs are still not coming to the table, and some people are saying that they're not coming to the table because they know that the CBA isn't close to being done. But even so, like, as long as it's in good faith, we're going to have a season, and I'm excited to be back to it because being in Tulsa for the final, it made me so excited to be around soccer again, and it made me just really excited for what the USL is building because the atmosphere of One Oak was special, and that can be the standard across the USL. It doesn't have to just be the final. But yeah, I got to go after that. But thank you for having me on, and cannot wait to listen to the rest of this.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Kaylor, and I'll talk to you soon. That's Kaylor Hodges, USL show, as well as his Hammering Down pod. Thank you again, Kaylor. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. And now we're back here once again with Carter Krishnaiyer, Andy King, John Krasinski. It is now a 4-person show tonight. But anyway, and Andy, after what Kaylor says, I mean, what would that do for a club like Orange County? Now, obviously, look, I'm not against having promotion and relegation in American soccer. Do I think it needs to happen? I think it needs to happen. But as I've always said, other elements need to come in. There we go. Whoop, there. Okay, I guess I had a little something. That was weird. McDonough's pulling the plug. McDonough's pulling the plug.
Paul's calling your ISP right now.
It's fine. Let him try. I'll get him. No, I'm just kidding. Andy, anyway, as I was saying, like I said, look, I mean, if we're going to have pro rel in one section of the professional divisions, in American soccer, it makes no sense because, I want to see it up and down like the rest of the world has it. Wouldn't you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, we would all like to see that, but with the way the Federation has um, allowed soccer to develop in America, if not encouraged soccer to develop in America, the way that it's happened is they've set up this kind of dysfunctional family feud pyramid. And, I've seen some people say that it works this way because that's how they want it to work. I won't pretend to know if that's the right answer or not. But, when you look at American soccer through the lens of the world game, it seems very off target, I guess is the best way I can describe it. It seems very inefficient, and this kind of competitive nature of leagues over teams is just causing people to spend money that maybe could be spent in better ways. It'd be nice if the Federation could step in and clean up the mess they've created, but right now I think it's just where they're at.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right there, Andy. I mean, it is a big mess. And John, when you see that, from a federation standpoint, it just feels like, we're always going to get these wars internally, always the soccer wars. And it just really makes me annoyed and frustrated because, look, I mean, I understand everyone's looking out for their own interests, and that's fine. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but it's time to really come together and say, okay, look, we're always going to compete against each other on the pitch, but you got to be friends off the pitch sometime sooner rather than later. And if everyone can finally come together about this, John, then maybe we won't have these issues always pop up. Because look, I understand what Paul McDonough is trying to do, but at the same time, does it feel like he's harming USL at this point in time, or do you think in their own way, do you think maybe he's helping their situation and trying to challenge, I guess, not just within the USL, but everyone else outside the USL?
Well, I think it's a classic corporate, uh, it's a corporate PR, not PR move, but a corporate stance. You're there. I think they think that if they just hold their ground, I think they're kind of the lack of action, except to just continue to talk about, oh, we've got Pro Rel coming and we have Division One coming, and just keep going, like a broken record. That piece of it is that's corporate speak. It's just classic corporate speak, and the NFL has been guilty, of this, and some of the other bigger leagues have been guilty of this over the years. And it's when it comes to dealing with, especially player negotiations. I think they just feel like they hold the cards. I think they just feel like in these cases that they hold the cards. I think, but again, hearing, that if you hear about what transpired in Tulsa that day and the whispers and the the actions speak louder than words, right? So the actions of the Steel Army, the actions of the players, and what was said, and how everybody felt afterwards, like there was a disconnect. And so I think in terms of the public view, people who know the game, who are close to the game, there's a certain perception, and that the league is that the league is not, that they're acting very, they're sticking to their guns here. And that, this, I think that they will come up. There will be some sort of, uh, for this particular CBA coming up. I think there'll be some sort of middle ground that will be found, just so that they could push forward. But I think the big one, as mentioned earlier, I think it's if and when this all happens with Pro-Rel and D1, that unified CBA, especially in terms of Pro-Rel, and you got players that might be moving up and down a bit more. That has to absolutely be addressed. They don't think they could move forward with that. But again, are they positioning themselves for for corporate sponsorships and television revenues and all those things? Like that's why they have to kind of put on this front. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to establish themselves, as a legitimate corporate entity that can take on Major League Soccer, that can be looked at as a legitimate soccer league throughout the globe. And if you listen to all their, all the, all of their, um, everything that they describe about the league. They talk about themselves as a league, an entity. We're the fastest growing league in the world, and that they, all their promotion and marketing, that they put out. It's all about that they're a unique, uh, you know, they're really making waves in the United States in terms of establishing, um, you know, the just United Soccer League as this major entity that covers all the different divisions and men's and women's leagues and all this and that and the other thing. So no, they feel very strong about where they stand and what they've developed, and in terms of the giving but now they need to do more. They need to step up and do more for the players, and I think that's where this is. It's just interesting. I'm just concerned that the players union, I hope they can get what they want for the players and in their best interest, but I don't know. I'm concerned long term for the players union, but we'll see.
We'll see. And Kartik, we've also mentioned this as well on Beyond the 90. Major League Soccer has officially moved to the international calendar. They're going to start off with a short season in 2027 by only going 3 months, and then I guess a quick playoff, and then go into a summer break, and then start the new season end of July, beginning of August. And then everything goes uniformly like the rest of the world does. And I don't understand why USL won't make that move either, because they haven't said anything about that yet. I don't even know if they're even thinking about it, moving to the international calendar. You would like to think that, you got to make this move somehow. You got to make this move to join with MLS, and then, make everything uniformly even. Because I think you and I think many of you guys agree that if USL doesn't go to the international calendar, like MLS has already done so, there might be more problems than what could be down the road for USL. Kartik?
Yeah. So USL talked about shifting the calendar before MLS did, and never acted on it. So let's remember that Jake Edwards made it very clear this was a plan, and they never followed up on it. Obviously, full disclosure here for those watching that don't know, I was the communications director for the NASL for many years. We talked about doing it too, and our solution actually was to do the fall and spring season, which really didn't shift the calendar. Let's be honest about it. I want to, before we get to the calendar change, I want to just follow up on what John said, because everything he said is accurate. And there is a level of rhetoric coming from the league office, a level of fluff that is just beyond the pale and beyond the reality. Those of us who actually are around this league and around clubs in this league understand is the actual happenings of the league. So, as Kaylor said before he left, we have all these crazy expansion announcements because there was this group that has bought the exclusive franchise rights to put a franchise in Eugene, Oregon, or wherever, and they make a big deal about it, and half these clubs don't start. None of the clubs they actually announce start on time. But let's remember that. And I think it's also important in this whole conversation to remember that because UROC is the primary investor, and now we have some private equity money from Bell Tower Partners flowing into USL, they are into selling franchises and they are into selling real estate. They do not operate the way a normal football league, normal soccer league would. So for all the people who criticize Major League Soccer and single entity, and I'm included in that, Daniel, you've been a critic in the past also, but they actually operate like a soccer league. So there is a difference. So to your point about calendar change, my concern is it's difficult to do promotion and relegation, and this goes back to even the conversations we were having during the presidential election in 2018, U.S. Soccer presidential election, where it was acknowledged by both Eric Ronaldo and Kyle Martino, the two leading kind of reform candidates. Although, of course, Steve Gans, who ran, is involved in this labor negotiation, right, on behalf of the players. So let's remember that, too. Steve was in that race. The feeling was if they were going to push promotion and relegation in American soccer, because remember at the time, MLS was not interested. USL had not talked about it. MLS has never been interested in it. The feeling was you have to shift calendars because you have to align transfer windows. If players are going to move, if teams are going to be relegated and promoted, there has to be a player movement that aligns with the rest of the world. So now it's even more of a concern for USL because MLS is shifting their calendar, and your windows are no longer aligned with them. You're not going to get the players on loan you'd like to get. Kaylor left us, but Jay Heaps, I know one of his strategies always has been and it's going to be again this year with Mark Briggs leaving kind of when he did, and Heaps having to reassume control of the technical side of that team. Get as many guys on loan from MLS as you can. Get 2 or 3, maybe even 4 guys on loan, and that's something that becomes very, very difficult to do when you're playing on a different calendar. One last point. I think either John or Taylor mentioned it earlier, or maybe it was Andy, about the Super League. So the Super League numbers are pretty high now, even though there isn't a papered CBA. The individual clubs have all agreed to certain levels of compensation that are far beyond, I don't want to say far beyond, but they're beyond what is being offered to the championship players. So that, again, that's now in Division One. So that's fair. But then you guys brought up, whoever it was that brought it up, great point. I didn't think about it, about USL Premier. If that number is not even with the Super League number, then USL has just created another problem for itself.
And Andy, Jake Edwards, when he was the president of the United Soccer Leagues, I really thought not so much that he kept everything uniformed within USL, but at the same time, he kept everything close to the vest. He was not so much like a politician, but more like, look, I have to have a level head about what we are doing here in the lower leagues below MLS. We have to make sure that not only that we are seen and heard, but we have to make everything make sense. And do you feel that McDonough has been intentionally rocking the boat here to make USL into something? I'm not saying I don't want USL to be bigger than it is. I want USL to be successful. Without a doubt, if we have no success in the USL, then everything falls apart within the pyramid of American soccer, regardless if we have a pyramid or not. I believe Jake Edwards did all he could to make USL better, but has McDonough started, I guess, teetering on the wrong side of the scale?
Yeah, I think when I compare, we call him Uncle Jake, like our cool uncle from England. Uncle Jake, I would say, under his leadership, the league and leagues, everything felt very deliberate, I guess is the right word, and everything felt very kind of planned and measured, and there was kind of this a smooth slope of progress towards, whatever the inevitable goal was. And COVID may have kind of thrown some monkey wrenches in the works there, but it does feel like recently the pace of change has been very frantic and maybe not as well thought out. I was recently listening to Connor Tobin talk about what's happening I hope I got his name right, Connor Tobin. And he made a really good point where he was talking about, when all these decisions are made about what's happening with the league and what's happening with Division One and Pro Rel and all these other things, who are they being the league? Who's the league advocating for? Are they advocating for the top teams? Are they advocating for the middle teams, the bottom teams? And I mean, top, middle, bottom is in economics. Who are they actually advocating and bargaining for even during the CBA negotiation? And that's not really clear because of the nature of how USL is put together from a business side. I think Kartik mentioned that earlier, where you've got all these different parties and who's representing who and in what what magnitude are they advocating for maybe the top teams in the league compared to the lower spending teams of the league. But in terms of the leadership, I don't want to talk bad about Paul because I don't really know him and I've only seen him on the TV. But I would just say from the pace of how things have changed, it does feel a little frantic and a little rushed. And I'm wondering how much of that is a function of a media deal, is a function of team valuations. I've been a big kind of conspiracy theorist that this is all just kind of pushing the league forward until the inevitable buyout of the league happens. But I don't know if that's true at all. That's all just my conspiracy brain kicking in.
Well, I mean, I have some conspiracy
Daniel, let me
theories of
just
my own, to be
jump
honest
in.
with you, because John, I worry about the not so much the leading of the lower leagues, but the losing the amount of clubs that may not survive after maybe one or two seasons with this whole promotion relegation situation. I mean, look, we all know what's going. We all know what happened with San Diego Loyal. As soon as MLS came into San Diego with San Diego FC, they just closed up shop. They barely even scratched any surface. They were there for like maybe 2 or 3 years. Landon Donovan was the head coach, then moved up to become part of the front office, and then afterwards it was all done and dusted. It was all gone. I mean, we've seen clubs come and go in the USL. Indy 11 at the moment is also, they're having their own issues because apparently the mayor all of a sudden took away his support for Indy 11 and gave it to some sort of hidden investor for MLS to come into Indianapolis. We haven't heard anything since then. We don't even know if there is a real investor in MLS. Maybe just saying MLS is coming just probably to scare off Indy 11 into shutting their own doors, but they're fighting, and I'm glad they're still around. But there are, like Kartik has said, there are some clubs that are not at the level where Pittsburgh is, or where Louisville is, or where Sacramento is, or maybe even Detroit City right now. I mean, there's a problem here that has to be fixed somehow.
Well, the somebody mentioned this earlier, and I think it's a very important piece. And the USL is very important part of the pyramid. And I think that the stability in Division 3 and Division 2 is going to be essential to a lot of what happens. I think that we're all talking about the top. Hey, look, if USL sides Premier League starts with 6 teams or 8 teams, so be it. I mean, I'm sure they don't want to do that and face MLS. But my point about that structure is probably more important than anything else, and then build it out. And some good points too also made about, hey, what about the fact that maybe in the last couple years it just feels like things that the incremental growth that has made the USL so successful is, maybe they're getting away from that a little bit. So I'm there's a little bit of concern there. I mean, there's some stability at the championship, stability in League One. League Two, I think, is a safe landing point for, we've seen the ups and downs, the topsy-turvy with Division 4 or 4th Division, with some of those other leagues and whatnot. Now, here's a very fascinating piece. I just did a podcast interview with Randy Waldrum, who was recently elected into the United States Soccer Hall of Fame, and was just talking about the university. He's technical director, no longer head coach at the University of Pittsburgh, but we were talking about U.S. soccer and in the involvement, the discussion of this extra piece where potentially with college athletics is it's just insane right now what's happening on that side, and they can't get it. They can't figure out the NIL. They can't figure all these different things out. But in terms of soccer, with the U.S. Soccer Federation could really, and I think they are interested in establishing some higher level and league or higher level entity where their players, they're getting paid anyway. There's nil money. They're trying to figure out ways to bring sponsorship monies and things so that these Division One programs that are in the Power Five schools can exist and compete. So for example, Pitt's teams, they tout, and they probably rightly tout themselves as being at a higher level than what we would look at as USL. I'm trying to think of W League or League Two, right? So, is there a place for that league to be in the pyramid? Like, there's a lot of questions out there that U.S. Soccer is looking into this. There's a realistic possibility that at least on the men's side, that something is going to happen, maybe later this year, maybe next year, where that becomes a piece of the soccer pyramid. So that I would just be fascinated. But what's interesting too is if that happens, or if whatever happens with that, they're also talking it's a fall spring proposition, which also goes in line with the MLS calendar, which also goes in line with MLS, in terms of the super draft and everybody getting on the same page. And I think that's why U.S. Soccer might be very interested, because look, like at the NFL and the NBA and some of the other big leagues that do the drafts are in line with the seasons. They're all on the same page, but not in soccer. If MLS goes to well, they are, as they go into this calendar. I think that's important to note, that United States Soccer will want all of the ducks to be in the same row, or as they say in Godfather 3, all our ships must sail in the same direction. So like, here we go. USL is going to be the outlier here if that happens. It's a fascinating conversation, but I do know that they supposedly did the research, and they felt like they just weren't ready to make the move to change the calendar.
Leave it to John to use the Godfather in a soccer conversation. That's great, John. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, we're all going to get rubbed out. Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. But anyway, I want to get this through. Karnak, you saw what I wrote about, a while back about, talking about the pro rel situation. Gentlemen, Andy and John, I wrote that I felt USL went the wrong position in the ladder to create a new league. I kind of felt that they should have created a professional fourth division and named that USL League 2, and the short season teams, the national teams, bring back the Premier Development League, bring back PDL, and rename it then. Do you think it's a safer way for USL to move forward? Or do you think, or maybe they should just leave it the way it is? Andy, we'll go for your thoughts and then John's.
Yeah, I kind of, and this is again a little bit of a hypothesis. I wonder how much of that conversation that kind of birthed USL Premier, how much of that was, the discussion around ProRail, which we knew that was kind of, on the front burner, so to speak, and they wanted to hammer that out. At what point does, and again, I don't mean this as a knock, at what point does, say, Louisville say, well, why don't we just do first division? And the league says, well, I guess we could, but here's all these barriers. And then does the media partners say, well, hey, we'd really like a league that has ProRel, and you can't really promote to first division, so why don't you have your own? How much of what we've been seeing over the last, year how much of that has been a function of outside factors and actors, and to be honest, outside financiers who are kind of dictating decisions made at the league level so that, this is going to sound ugly, so that New Rock can enrich themselves.
It's true, John.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not, I don't know. I've kind of said my piece in terms of where I think everything's going to fall, but yeah, I don't know. The USL Championship is their stability is very key in all this, and I just think that that's the piece that um, they can't lose sight of that,
Yeah,
and that kind of goes back to this original conversation we're having, why we're here talking, is that if they cannot provide a quality collective bargaining agreement, and this is going to drag on, um, then are they a legitimate entity? Are they really a legitimate entity that can provide, players from other country, people are watching, and they're I don't know. I just think that that people are watching. Players may not want to come to the United States to play, or may look to go play elsewhere. And I don't know. It's just I, yeah. I just think that this is this is this this needs to get resolved, and hopefully it will be.
yeah. No, I hope so too. And Kartik, as I've said already, if USL does announce finally that they'll make the calendar change as well, I feel better about the position of the Open Cup, obviously, because we got to have everyone on the same page. That's
Right.
the most number one thing, regardless of what MLS does. There's silly, stupid, fan fatigue crap that they talked about towards the beginning of last season to talk about okay, you can only play in Leagues Cup and you can't play in Open Cup if you're part of the Champions Cup, or you're not in League Cup if you're going to be in Open Cup through Champions Cup or whatever it is, and blah 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 and blah 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 and all that other
I do want to say, I'm
phony
sorry, I
baloney.
don't mean to interrupt,
Go ahead.
Daniel, but I do want to say, I mean, and I've talked to people with the club, and in and around the team, and the discussion about playing, having a schedule where you're playing games in December and January and February in Pittsburgh. I mean, we're sitting here under, a foot of snow. I haven't been able to move my car. My wife's car was buried. I mean, we're under all this snow. I just at Highmark Stadium, I mean, that the Riverhounds are training their first week indoors. There's no way they can clear. You just can't imagine. So I just can't imagine that. That's the biggest piece of it, I think. I know that there, solutions. You could play all the warm weather, games in January and in February or whatever, but and we don't get a foot of snow all the time, but it just, I don't know. I just do think that weather is a factor. I think that, again, the USL Championship, League One and USL Championship, I just don't think have the logistics, the resources, the personnel, the fan bases that established enough. I mean, they're doing good work. They're building the incremental growth. Let's not try to get too far ahead of ourselves. And maybe in a way, MLS, by moving to, this way, it really does force the USL's hand a little bit, and puts them at a competitive disadvantage. And I think that's something that, but yeah, I can't see that happening with the USL Championship side or USL League One side playing through January and February in a lot of these markets. From my point of view, I just can't see it. I can't see the fans coming. I mean, the Riverhounds, think about this for a second. Their schedule every year, I guarantee you, they will have, and they did it again this year, probably out of their first 10 games, usually two at most, maybe three, are home games. They purposefully schedule away games in March and April. And some years it works out. Some years it doesn't. They get off to slow starts because they're playing so many games on the road, and these are part of these conditions the players are talking about. I'm sure it's just an issue. The travel and the front end of the season for the Riverhounds has always been very, very challenging, and throw in the Open Cup and now the USL, the USL Cup, all these different things, and they're playing so many road games early in the season. And I know it adds, and why? Because they can make money in the summer. They could fill the stands in the summertime, and they found a successful formula. So I'm sure at least from the Riverhounds ownership point of view, they probably would rather keep the schedule the way it is. Oh, and
Yeah,
not only
I
that,
mean,
sorry, and you're competing in the winter with the Steelers, a little bit more the Steelers and the Penguins versus the Pirates.
no, I understand that, but I mean, I'm assuming they'll have a winter break. MLS has said they're gonna have a winter break, but we'll see what
Yeah.
happens in the future. I mean, look,
Yeah.
I'm not here to, tell whoever has to do this or who has to do that. We just feel that it would be more practical if MLS is gonna make this move. I mean, even the bigger markets. Look, New York City has two baseball teams, two NFL teams, three hockey teams if you count the Devils in New Jersey, two NBA teams. And obviously we have two MLS teams, and now we have the Cosmos, and now we have other PDL, or excuse me, USL League Two teams, amateur teams. I mean, they do. I mean, the Metropolitan League does spring and fall every single year. So I mean, they're all over the place. And don't forget, MPSL also has teams as well. So I mean, it's all the same situation. And look, I know Pitt plays on Saturdays for college football. The Steelers play Sundays on NFL Sundays for NFL football. I know the Penguins are always all over the place too. I know that. I know, but still, sooner or later, they're going to have to be like, we got to worry about our own situation. We can't worry what the Steelers do, what the Penguins do, what the Pirates do. They got to worry about themselves. And I think, and I'm not disagreeing with you, obviously. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, it's time to become a big boy league sometime soon and make this change. That's all I'm saying. But, other than that, gentlemen, this has been a very good discussion all around. And I really do appreciate your time, because even Kayla's time, unfortunately, had to skedaddle a little bit early. But still, though, I do appreciate all of your opinions here on the subject. I mean, look, like I said, I don't want to see a lockout. I don't want to see a strike. I don't want to see this season not start on time. I want to see it start so that everything's all hammered out and it's all copacetic. But if they're still negotiating, they're still good faith negotiating, and you do start on time, that makes me feel good about it too. The only problem is, hopefully, there won't be a snag somewhere in the middle of the season. And that's all I'm worried about. Let's go for final thoughts. Kartik will go to you, and then Andy, John.
Yeah, obviously we're hoping that real labor strife can be avoided, and that some of the clubs that are encouraging the posture from USL HQ come to the table and change their posture. I just really quickly wanted to address the Paul McDonough versus Jake Edwards issue that Andy brought up. That is a big part of why we're where we are. And I'm not trying to personalize this. I'm not trying to be nasty about it, but it was my sense, even before I was told by multiple people, that the tone would be very different if Uncle Jake, as you put it, were still the guy that was leading the negotiation. Paul McDonough, I covered in Orlando. I dealt with him closely. You remember, Daniel, when he was the technical director of Orlando City. He's a bull in the china shop. I mean, he is really he's like Bill Peterson, who was the commissioner of the NASL, who I worked for. The second commissioner I worked for, David Downs, very different personality. That was like going from Jake to McDonough, going from David Downs to Bill Peterson at NASL HQ. And he's not a fun guy to negotiate with. And even when Inter Miami was trying to get its stadium done in Miami and then in Fort Lauderdale, I interacted with him then covering it. And he was very, very, very difficult for the Miami commissioners, and then the Fort Lauderdale commissioners, and then Broward County, where they wanted to have a training facility and an academy, and they didn't get that facility that they were trying to get a hold of. Very difficult to deal with Paul McDonough. So that's one thing I would say. And then the other thing in closing I want to say is that U.S. Soccer, we talked a little bit about the pyramid here, where Pitt would fit in a pyramid, right? And if we had a women's college teams in a pyramid, Pitt would be, they would be above maybe even some Super League teams, truthfully at this point, with what the job Randy did as the coach there. And by the way, he did a great job when he did the Nigeria job temporarily for a couple months. This phenomenal job he did. U.S. Soccer has to stop acting like an absentee landlord with the second and third divisions. The foundation for any pyramid are going to be levels 2 and level 3, and they need to take more of an interest in this. And this is something I dealt with when I worked in the NASL, and since NASL disappeared and USL assumed USL was the third division in those days, they assumed second and third division. They've had to deal with it. So, in fairness, we beat up on USL HQ a lot tonight, but they are also kind of dealing with one hand tied behind their back because U.S. Soccer, who could facilitate some labor harmony, could facilitate some player standards, could facilitate a better relationship between all parties, has taken the attitude of an absentee landlord and someone and an entity that is just interested in money at this point. So if this is actually going to really be solved, the combination of this labor problem and then getting the USL structure right for promotion and relegation, U.S. Soccer is going to have to get off the sidelines and help and not be in the way. I'm not saying they need to then get tough like they did with NASL. The PLS itself needs to be revised so that USL can do this properly. And so they have a responsibility here, and that would be my closing thought. They need to get off the sidelines.
Absolutely. Andy?
I'll be really brief. Nobody wants to see a lockout or a work stoppage. The players, the fans, the teams, for a league where the teams rely heavily on gate attendance for their revenue, no one wants to see that. So I would hope that the owners who are on board are calling the owners who are not on board and telling them to get on board before we all take a bath. I'm old enough to remember back when Major League Baseball and I think NHL both had either strikes or lockouts, and it took years to get the attendance back, and USL doesn't have years to afford, really. Look at what COVID did. It that was a disaster, and we don't need that again so close. The second thing I'll say really quickly in regards to the CBA, I'm going to paraphrase, and I think it was Joe Farrell. He had a really good quote on social media from the PA, and I'm going to paraphrase. He said, players are not looking to be millionaires. They're looking for a nice apartment. No one's getting rich playing in the USL. They just want to have a nice apartment that they're not sharing with 2 or 3 other guys. That seems like a pretty basic standard of living for a professional athlete.
Yep, I agree. No one does the dishes. John, please, your final thoughts, please.
Well, first of all, the forum, it's been a great forum. I've learned a lot from everybody. Thank you for having me. This has been very enlightening. I do know, being here in Pittsburgh, we are home of solidarity in terms of workers, and the United Steelworkers is still strong. The Labor Day parade here is always going to be a big place for workers. So, and I think that the Steel Army shows that they are behind the players, that they love the team, they love the logo, they love the black and gold, but ultimately they showed their true colors last year in terms of being behind the players, whether however you feel about that. But so I do think that the core team is going to be the players are going to be supported. Whatever happens, I think in terms of the larger perception, if you will, if I think if anything were to happen as far as a stoppage, it would be pretty catastrophic for the teams. For the league probably doesn't think it would be. Maybe, I don't know, but for the teams trying to survive, and the structure that we just talked about, from level 2, 3, even, I've been very closely following and have good relationships with all of the Steel City FC organization here in Pittsburgh, which has really come on. They've done some really great things. They're growing incrementally. They feel like they're doing things the right way, building a club with a community base, and they're doing some really great things. And they have moved into USL League Two from NPSL, and they're just jumping into the USL because they realized it is a bigger ticket, but they're in that USL League Two. They may have aspirations to want to be a League One team someday, a club. I mean, they have to continue to grow and build incrementally, but if this pyramidal structure is not, it doesn't have the stability and doesn't provide them with the proper incentives to build and be a player into this promotional relegation piece, then it's going to be very disheartening. But in Pittsburgh, our goal would be we'd love to have a team in USL Champ, either at the top or second tier, and have a team at the third tier or and the fourth tier. That would be the vision, someday. So these are all things that we all hope to see and will hopefully will come to fruition. But right now, it just feels like they're so far apart, and I think that we'll just have to wait and see how things go. I'm very anxious to see what happens in terms of how the players that when asked these questions, how the organization when asked these questions over the next couple weeks, and we will, in the media here in Pittsburgh, we'll ask these questions, and we'll see where it goes. And
Yeah,
again,
we'll
thanks
see
for
what
having me.
happens. No, absolutely. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching us tonight. Once again, thanks to Carter Krishnine, my colleague at Beyond the 90, Andy King of the Orange County SC Soccer Cast, John Krasinski of Pittsburgh Soccer Now, and of course, thanks again to Kaylor Hodges from the USL Show and the Hammering Down Pod. My name is Daniel Feuerstein. Thank you very much for watching us tonight. And as always, please, 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 please enjoy your football. Thank you. Have a good night. Take care. So long. And bye-bye for now. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.